Hey everybody, I'm here with my buddy Ben Ortlip for another episode of Beach Talks. So I want you to listen to what he's got to say because I think he's an expert when it comes to culture. He's a guy I love to call. I call him Deep Doo Doo. He's got some deep answers, and I think you'll get a lot out of today's conversation. I mean, Ben's done a little bit of everything. I'm gonna let him bring us up to speed on kind of chronologically what he's done, so that you'll kind of know how he got to where he is today. So what did you do after high school or college?
High school and college, I was a major underachiever. When I got to college, though, I went to a small school and kind of discovered who I was. Everything was a toy to be played with, and so I ended up working for the school newspaper. I became the editor of the newspaper. I actually wrote and did photography for local newspapers, reporting on things, took photos for the yearbook and everything.
Yeah.
And I soon discovered that this whole, visual and, communications was my thing back then at first. So I got a job in advertising, and my real career happened almost immediately when I got a job in advertising. I got this incredible opportunity in advertising. I had a great career, but there was just something. I mean, I was doing commercials. I was working with celebrities, and just hundreds and hundreds of commercials, and it was great. But there was something wrong with something. I didn't know what it was. So career-wise, it was great, but there was just something about it. And I realize now that it was exactly the same as the Great Resignation and this sort of quiet quitting that's going on, because I was one of the original quiet quitters, and so I ended up getting out of advertising, get out of my own, started my own production company. Still would do some writing for some of the clients. Ghost wrote a bunch of books for authors. And that introduced me to working with some of these people we call thought leaders in the leadership and management space. I mean, I worked for the Drucker Institute. I wrote content for, I've worked with Tony Robbins, pulling all-nighters, while he's in Fiji. Content for John Maxwell, Henry Cloud, Ken Blanchard.
Rock stars.
Yeah, guys and the whole time, that sounds like name dropping, but really what I'm trying to impress about that is the idea that I was learning I didn't know what leadership was, and so I was learning what these business disciplines were.
That's awesome.
Leadership, management. I had a business minor in college, but I didn't pay too much attention to what they were teaching back then.
Right, none of us did.
So the next thing writing was sort of a passport that got me into working with these different people. And once I learned a little bit about the content, I was being invited to come in and talk about certain principles and do coaching and consulting and things like that. This is over a period of time.
Right.
So for the last, maybe 15, 20 years, that's kind of been, I have the production business going, but I've really just focused on the consulting part of it. And guess what the big topic is that everybody wants to talk about now?
What?
Culture.
Culture. Yeah. So let's talk about culture. So, what's different about culture pre-COVID, after COVID?
Oh wow. Okay. The biggest thing is that COVID just kind of kicked the anthill. COVID, it was already stuff that was already happening.
Yeah.
Just kind of got exposed because of COVID. And I'll tell you how it works. So you have to think of, when you take a job somewhere, or if you're a leader that's managing a company, realize that, there's this employment contract, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what we don't think about much, that's even more influential, is we have what's called a social contract. So you have an employment contract, and that's just how much you're going to pay, how much you're going to work, what you're expected to do. But it's the social contract that today drives really the engagement levels, the sentiment.
That's the culture piece.
Turnover. Yeah, it's all embedded in the social contract as it becomes culture. Most people don't really think of it that way. They don't pay attention to it. And so what COVID did was, we had, I mean, if you want to really just get down to it, the employment contract was the only thing kind of holding everything together. Hey, you need to come here because you need a salary in order to pay.
But also that's what we did too, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we didn't think we could not work on Friday, right?
And Gallup will tell you since 1990 they've been measuring the state of essentially the social contract, and the social contract has been terrible. That the scores are in the low 30s. Like imagine getting a 30 for a grade. The state of the social contract since 1990, it's 33 years, right? And so that was already broken. And then when COVID hit and the government was basically your paycheck for a short period of time,
Right.
That's when a lot of people, and you're already halfway home, you're halfway unemployed anyway because you're working from home. That's when a lot of people just went, hey, wait a minute. I see, I'm so close. I can taste it, to what's wrong with my situation here. And so what COVID did and what it made so different about the workplace today is that now people are, once they've tasted the idea of all of autonomy and, jettisoning the social contract that was so broken before, they're now piecing together a different version of their life.
So what's the quiet quitting all about? What's the nuts and bolts of that?
Well, quiet quitting,
or resignation or whatever.
Yeah.
What's the word for it?
all of that. The Great Resignation.
Resignation is really what?
Well, it's people literally leaving their jobs and going to do
But
some
why?
other thing.
Why?
It's because they don't want to do it anymore. The majority of them are people who maybe were second incomes for a home, or people who had enough solopreneur in them or side hustle in them to go find something else that would pay the bills.
So to give them an excuse to quit, basically.
And so it was so similar. It like brought them right up to auditioning what it would look like to quit, that they were like, hey, I'm just going to go ahead and do this. It was so disruptive. It's the kind of thing nobody would ever disrupt themselves that much on purpose. But through the disruption, they realized that, hey, I'm practically living like this now. Let me just go ahead and pull the trigger. And so, a lot of the surveys show that there's 1 million females missing from the workplace.
1 million.
1 million. If you just look at the labor pool in North America, it's like we just said, okay, here's 1 million people. We're just taking them out of the workforce. And these are people who just used to work and now just don't, or they do some kind of.
But we got really low unemployment numbers.
Yeah.
Are those people not showing up on that because they're out of the workspace? Is that why the people that resigned or didn't go back, these million women?
It's hard to tell because unemployment measures the number of people who are saying, hey, I don't have a job.
That's true.
And so it's different from, employment numbers measure the number of people. It's hard to tell who's kind of in the middle. Some people are claiming unemployment while they have a side hustle. So I don't know that I trust
the unemployment number.
I don't know that I trust numbers right now when it comes to that because, there's a lot of bivocational people who, and one of their vocations is the unemployment office. So
yeah.
Can I pause this real quick?
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just gonna adjust your mic. It's just rubbing on your collar just a little
oh,
bit.
dang it.
It's okay. It's barely noticeable, but I want to fix
We want it to
before
be
it gets
perfect.
Yeah, fix it before it gets bad.
And I say perfect. My wife said, no, it's perfect.
There we go.
I said, you gotta get out being then. Yes. Y'all write and speak.
That's right.
All right. We're good to go.
So
All right.
I don't know how much of that was intelligible, but
It's all intelligent. But all right, so we've got this shift and this great resignation, and now we're in a new era a little bit. There are people that are saying, hey, people are going to have to come back to work. There are people saying, I don't want to go back to work. Where are we going?
yeah. Well,
What's the crystal ball for the next 5 years?
yeah, well, it depends on what leaders do. I think you're going to find, first of all, you're finding a fragmented and democratized business landscape. So, what has been, if you want to call it good for the economy, is that a lot of people who would otherwise have stayed at a monolithic company have now been encouraged to go out and try something different. And not all of them are solopreneurs. A lot of them are partnerships, but it's good for small business, and small business has always been the backbone of the economy. What will probably happen, is that the zeitgeist of the workplace in general will shift, and people will realize that the culture of an organization is a huge part of its business function.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think we're in for a culture shift that includes understanding the workplace better. And that's the work that I've been doing for 10 years, is this recognition that there's been a shift in the workplace. There's been a shift in the psychology of work,
Right.
to where people used to be, we used to have, workplace was primarily an authoritative environment. And then over the last 50 years or so, it sort of shifted from authoritative into influence as kind of the driving, the operating system. And if you think about how the social contract has evolved, people used to be kind of almost factory automatons, and they would just kind of, authority worked with people, and they were just sort of, tapping their reptilian brain to reproduce these functions on the assembly line or whatever. And over time, though, they became more sophisticated in the things they want. It's a lot like Maslow's hierarchy. They just sort of started moving up in more sophisticated,
Right.
what we call psychosocial needs. They wanted something different. But for the last 30 to 40 years, we've reached what is really almost a transcendent state for the psychology of the workforce. These are people, Maslow would have called it self-actualization. And these are people who want some sense of purpose. They want to find connection with other people. They want to contribute to something that matters in the world. They want to get good at something and feel a sense of identity from what they do. Not just to replicate a task, but they also want to be known as the guy that does this. And if you think about it, even in the retail world, there's been an explosion of things like craft beers and handmade tools and fashions and things like that. It's all a reflection of the psychology of the culture at large, but also the workplace. So that's not going away, and that's driving, employers to have to play in that field if they want to be competitive.
So, but is that what, so your opinion going forward though, if you're a leader, or would you tell a leader of a company needs to bring his people back in to create and keep a great culture?
Not necessarily, and of course it depends on the business. There was just a study released on the optimal work from home situation, the hybrid workplace,
Right.
they call it. And what the study found was that the perfect or the optimal arrangement, and I guess, of course it's different depending on the company, but they said 3 days a week was the optimal in-office. And they also said that the optimal days for everybody to be there were Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday.
Well, I love that as an employee, right?
Yeah, and I think if you think about it, that just smacks of autonomy is what it's saying, is like, and it also smacks of person's independent efficiency. We're all sort of recognizing that we're wasting a lot of time sitting in traffic. I've been saying this since, for 20 years, and so I sit up here in my little office, and sometimes I'll do stints at other companies or whatever. But what stood out to me was, we'll drive 2 hours each way in traffic so that we can send emails across to the guy across the hall and back and forth. And it's like,
Wow.
it just, the amount of FaceTime, it's just gotten a lot more efficient since, the COVID epidemic.
So it depends is the bottom line.
I think it depends. There's definitely a benefit to face-to-face. It used to be the essence of culture. All culture used to happen around the water cooler. And it was so imperative that we have that sort of organic encounters with each other, and would share information and would share the values that way. And there's still something important that happens when people are physically proximal, working
Right.
together. But we're also, remember, this is coming from somebody who's been remote working
Forever.
with clients that I never have met face to face with. But what I've noticed is that everybody sort of warmed up to the idea, and we all think of each other. Even I know there's a lot negative said about technology and phones and devices, and there's the pictures in Time magazine of the man and the woman in bed, and they're both back to back looking at their phones and all that. So yes, that is not necessarily a great thing for intimacy, but when you think about the work relationship, there's an upside to what it does for communication. And for example, we can have asynchronous communication now. And I'll literally be next to my wife, she's texting somebody, I'm texting somebody, and just because of the sequence in which communication's happening, I'll end up sending her a text message knowing that the time she needs this information is going to be later on when some other trigger happens, or and the same thing happens at work. We're able to essentially pause and park a conversation with somebody, or a job jacket, so to speak, and hand it to somebody in their inbox, metaphorically speaking, so that they can get to it when they're ready.
Yeah.
So, this is the way the psychology of the workforce has changed. It's autonomous. I don't want to talk to you when you're ready to talk to me necessarily, but I need the information, and if I have the luxury of choosing when, it's going to be later on, because right now I'm trying
Great point.
to get this. So the point is tons of flexibility, tons of autonomy, some independence, but mostly let's be aware of things that are changing, things that are different. Because again, the employment contract is important, but it's the social contract that's making people, quit and go find another job.
So what, I remember one time I asked, you were telling me culture is craft, community, and cause.
Okay.
Is that still the case?
So those are the three motivators
Tell me about those.
for someone in a self-actualized state.
Okay.
So there's actually 15 motivators in the workforce. 7 of them come from the management discipline. So they're things that have always been there. Things like pay and benefits. The reason that everybody walked off the fields into the factories to be told to operate like a flesh and bone robot was because they were getting pay and benefits. And, as a farmer, the weather was unpredictable, and I didn't even know if I was going to be able to feed my family. So
More stable.
pay and benefits, safety from the elements, operational organization and efficiency, things like that, workload, stress load, matching people with their skills and talents. Those are all just blocking and tackling management disciplines. And then as you move up, think of Maslow's hierarchy in just 3, let's just think of it as 3 levels. I know there's 5 or 7 depending.
So we got like a pyramid.
Yeah, so
And that's
pyramid, the bottom level is survival, and the management, school of management and those disciplines sort of speak to the survival needs of a worker.
Which are food, shelter.
Food, shelter, clothing.
Okay.
And the way they do that is with, pay and benefits,
Okay,
operations,
okay.
things like that. As someone moves up in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is exactly what happened in the middle of the 20th century, they start to experience the desire for success. So we go from survival to success, and that's, they want some status, they want some recognition, they want the ability to advance their state and, move up in a career, things like that. And that's where leadership became a thing. Before that, it really hadn't existed except in management circles. Today,
Yeah, it really wasn't management, it was leadership. like in a car factory, right? It was more management to manage
Originally-
it, and then as we got into other stuff, more white collar service stuff, it
Yeah.
became more leadership,
And
right?
so all of the bookstores, you go into the business section, books used to talk about, management kind of things. And then the word leadership just completely took over. And that's because the psychology of the workforce changed from a survival mentality to a success mentality. And so that means that companies had to start casting vision. They had to start being innovative. They had to start thinking about how to advance their people, not just having you employed, but it's like, hey, we're going to move you up to this, or we're going to put you in the leadership development program, things like that. And essentially, the greatest emotional shift there was, instead of looking at you as, someone underneath me, there started to be more of an exchange of dignity. So, we use the word empathy a lot of times, that instead of just looking at you as somebody who could do something for the company and measuring you based on that alone, the good companies started noticing that you were human and that you had feelings and that you had a family, and so you see that showing up in the 80s and the 90s. But to craft, cause, and community, as of about 1990 and the year 2000, we started seeing a big shift, and it's because people moved into this top level, the self-actualization level, the psychology of the workforce changed. So we went from survival to success, and now people are going from success to significance. And when we entered significance, that's when we saw that the needs that people felt, if they were in that category, they wanted to be good at something, that's mastering craft. They wanted to believe in something, that's contributing to a cause. And they wanted to belong to something. That's what we call community. So that's where craft, cause, and community come from. If all these other needs are pretty satisfactory,
But they got to all be pretty much met first.
they have to be reasonably met, and then they never go away completely, and the craft, cause, and community will still be there even if some other needs are unmet, but it just gets harder to see these needs by themselves.
So you've taken that, and then have you written about it, and then you've got your software. So tell us have you written about it?
Yeah.
Is there anything people can get that you've read? Written?
I haven't published a book about it yet. There's some blog posts and things like that. And a lot of that is in the works,
But you're doing online stuff or testing or consulting or what? What do you call that?
Mostly been busy with just helping companies. So at some point it'll be appropriate to write a book about it. But I have written, pieces of it in terms of, I've written chapters that would explain the principles that drive it and everything else. And we've got some case studies. But probably the big thing is that we do have a very fine-tuned system now for going into an organization. And again, they have their employment contract, but what we do is evaluate the social contract, and we can pinpoint exactly where something is broken. The leader of an organization can't always tell that, because they're not in it all the time. But most importantly is there's a lot of communication resistance. People are afraid to say something. They don't know how to articulate it. And so we, as a third-party organization, can come in and with our framework, we're able to say, this is exactly where the leadership dysfunction is coming from. Here's exactly what you need to do about it. And then we walk them through it. Most of our client relationships are 2 to 3 year engagements, where we, introduce the concepts and walk them through the process.
What does that look like? Is that a dashboard thing, or what is it?
The survey has a dashboard. That's how we.
So
present
you'd send
the
out a
data.
survey to the.
Yeah, we'll
to all
send out
the
a survey.
employees.
Each employee gets, shiny 16-page report that tells them something about themselves that they didn't know.
So like a personality thing.
It tells you whether you're craft, cause, and community. It tells you what your favorite parts about your job are, and it helps you articulate
What you don't
tells
like.
them what they don't like. But then we aggregate all that data and we get a report on the company. We also do some field interviews to get the narrative behind the data so that we can find out that,
You talk in their language, so to speak.
and we ask them, hey, why is this score lower than some of the others? And they'll say, well, our fax machines don't work anymore, and or they smoke a lot or whatever. So, but we can find out exactly what's going on, and it runs the gamut of what you'll find, but it always goes back to one of those 15 categories. And so the other thing that we do is we take some company data, we take the head count, the amount they're spending on labor, some basic demographic and financial data, nothing confidential or anything, but we have some cool algorithms that take the employee sentiment and cross-map it with the basic data. And so we're able to say, this problem is costing you this much in employee inefficiency. So it helps to budget things because, culture things, it's always been so nebulous. But, we're able to say, hey, it's only a $10,000 problem. Don't throw $100,000 at fixing it. Or sometimes we're able to say, hey, look, I would focus on this one because it's costing you $1.5 million. If we can just raise that score by 5%, it'll be worth, $16 million, and it's only going to cost us $30,000 to fix it.
Yeah.
So just trying to quantify.
But does that take time to change all of that? I mean, you said you do
Depends
these
on what
consulting things usually is a couple of years. Why does it take a couple of years?
Well, it doesn't always. Some of the things are easy to fix and they're quick. But it's, I say 2 to 3 years because the size of the organization, the bigger the organization, there's this concept called change management. And so you have to be sensitive and delicate when you shift things around. You can't just come in and
with a
wave
sledgehammer.
wand. Yeah. And typically we're not just trying to, put a fix in place, but we're trying to bring the leaders along to a mindset so that they can begin to recognize these things on their own. I mean, our job is to walk away as soon as possible and leave in our path a self-sustaining organization. So I don't, that's just, to me, that's the win, is if they can do these things. Yeah.
So how do they, like if you got a big company, you got an Exxon or some company like that, how do you start relating to or talking to your people when you got so many? Is that where your audio, video, writing comes into play, or what?
So one of the categories does address communications, and big companies like that notoriously undercommunicate. They not only have messaging shortfalls, in other words, they do enough content, but they also have infrastructure failures. So they don't have a good way to send out a global thing that they're sure everybody sees. They can email it, but email's real problematic. Some of them have, their yammers and devices that, Slack is a good one that a lot of people like, and those are great. For a lot of companies, it's important to have kind of what we call a hub. I call them the virtual water cooler, because as much as possible, it's important to think about sort of a central clearinghouse that everybody's going to see. Everybody has to drink some water during the day, and they see the bulletin board with the information on it. But there's some pretty affordable tools where you can create this sort of central thing that everybody sees, on a regular basis.
It's like an internal channel, basically.
Exactly. Yahoo tried to be your homepage for a while.
Do the employees need to hear from the CEO and the CFO, or does it just their managers fine? I mean, what gives them the most substance? You know, like, okay, this is something I need to think about.
Well, that depends on, kind of who are the culture hosts of the companies. Yeah, the CEO is an obvious person
Right.
to hear from. And they need contact. It's different in every company, but the point is that most companies that we see are communicating at about 12 to 20% of what they should be.
Wow.
And so, we just try to ramp up the content. If you think about it, the world around us has increased.
Massive.
Yeah, the clutter and the internal company hasn't done anything to turn the volume up on their voice, and so they're just completely drowned out. The only information that a lot of people get is in meetings with people or an email. And there's ways to fold, sort of the emotional element, the audio-visual piece. We like to use emotions, humor.
Would you do video for them?
Yeah, absolutely. Video's a big part.
Would you write what they need to say for them?
Well, we do a lot of production work if it's necessary. That's not our emphasis.
Right, but you can,
necessarily,
because
but-
that's your background.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's just something that comes in handy.
It's one of those 15 extra things. Right?
It can be. We're not trying to. There's a danger of bias there. That we think everybody. We do videos, so you need to do videos. And that is not a. I mean, we love it when we find companies that have a great communications department, and sometimes we can go, your communication skills are great, but your messaging is off. Let us help you fix that. Here's how to think about it.
Mm-hmm.
Because we get task saturated too. We love finding ways to use internal resources, just to help them. Most companies are already spending the money. They're just spending it wrong. And so we like to show people, hey, what about this? And
Okay, so what about dealing with the younger? You got 30-somethings in there, and then you got
Yeah.
60-somethings in there. Is that a different communication style for each one, or?
It's not so much a communication style as much as it is understanding the psychological contract that exists.
And they're different?
The social contract. They can be. I mean, just because of what boomers were more exposed to the authoritative and maybe influence
Right.
kind of operating systems for businesses. And so a lot of those people say, what do you mean you want more freedom and flexibility? Get your act together and come to work, And of course, the millennials are all introduced to a different set of expectations. So, but the reality is that a lot of boomers have a millennial mindset. So it's not really age related. It's more that the psychology of the workforce has changed. And there's some inertia, some of
Yeah.
the older folks still kind of think the way they
Yeah.
used to, but honestly, those people have changed as well. They just maybe haven't changed as quickly.
So they're getting jiggy with it then, I guess.
A little bit.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, they want flexibility too.
Yeah, yeah. So if you're going to do a culture assessment on your company, do you need to get all the C-level people on board with you, or do you find a CEO that says, hey, I need, like when somebody hires me to come speak, they always be like, man, this is where the deficit is, right?
Yeah.
And you always wonder, that's their interpretation of the deficit, is that everybody else's interpretation, So, but is it important for it to work to have as many people on board as possible? I would think so, but
For the assessment, no. The assessment's very objective. It just, if you tell us to go find out, we're going to go in and we're going to bring back black and white data that says, here's the state of the social contract. People are either happy or they're not happy. Here's why they're happy. Here's why they're not happy. Here's exactly how you can manipulate and fix things. So that's a very objective sort of analysis, and I don't, whoever pulls the trigger and says do it, they don't have to be on board.
So just getting the survey done really doesn't matter.
Right, but where the resistance that we sometimes see is how much buy-in is there in terms of, I see the numbers, but some people just kind of shake their head and go, yeah, but that's just culture.
They don't get it, or
Yeah, culture's just, they just need to do their job and shut up or whatever.
Right.
And so there, I mean, I understand it's a new era, it's a new kind of concept, and it takes time for people to go through the sequence of awareness to understanding and adoption, and there's some people that aren't there yet. So in terms of, okay, now we have the data, we can identify the areas of focus and what they'd be worth to the company. But then, if the COO is kind of, reading other books and not really focused on this,
Right.
and he's got some idea already, it's going to be difficult to gain an advantage based on what we know.
I got you.
So yeah, you're right. There has to be
Some buy-in.
enough to create some momentum. And then what happens in a lot of places is it's really a factor of alignment and momentum, to the extent that people in the company are first of all, they're aware that their culture is impacting their business, their profitability, not just their sentiment.
Right.
I don't want to feel good about it, but we also are trying to maximize the effectiveness of our company. To the extent that there's alignment, it's easier to find and create momentum. And as you start changing things, it starts to make a case for itself. So,
All right, tell me about ghostwriting. There's always somebody that wants to write a book, and there's always people like me that can't
Yeah.
write. I butchered the English language, but from a ghostwriter standpoint, what would you say to somebody that says, "Hey, I want to write a book"? What's the ABCs on what you would say? Hey, you need to do this,
Yeah.
these things
yeah.
first. How would you tell a buddy what to do?
So first of all, the distinction that I would want to make is, because I believe in writing as personal expression first. And there's a lot of people who should write a book because of what it's going to mean for them to articulate things that are otherwise just struggling for utterance, So there's value in that. So it's not necessarily just for, I want to get a book out. To be honest with you, most of the books that are published are mainly for mom and dad and the 16 people that you coerced into buying and reading one.
Right.
But assuming that somebody has an idea for a book, the publishing industry has changed so much over the last 20 years, going to hybrid. It doesn't have the same gravitas that it once had. Writing a book used to be the ultimate gravity around, thought leadership. And now it's still strong, but it has lost some of that. So the first question that I like to understand is, do you have something to say? You don't have to have something to say to write a memoir. It can just be a way to organize your thoughts, to share them with your loved ones, or to codify a philosophy and a way of thinking that you have that needs to be shared with people in the company or something like that. But when I evaluate it, there's really, that's the first thing I look at is, and that's to determine how you should approach the book. Do you need to hire a ghostwriter? Do you maybe just need somebody to do some editing behind it? Fit for purpose is how, do we need a major publisher? So just trying to understand the objectives, and they kind of go back to, do you have something to say? If so, what is it you're trying to say? And who needs to hear it? How many of them are there? How many languages do we need to print it in? That kind of thing. So that's the first thing. The second thing that I look for is a hook, because a lot of people have
Just like music business.
a lot of people have had something to say, but they don't have a good way to say it.
Yeah.
And then the next thing I look for is, just the manuscript itself. What's the voice? Are you the right person to say it, to this thing that needs to be said? If so, what is your voice? Are you, in written language, are you a run-on sentence writer, or are you a person that has rhythm and cadence to make emphasis on certain points? Just figuring out what's the right voice. And ultimately, you've got to make a decision about how to publish it, because you can self-publish, you can traditional publish, you can hybrid publish, and there's a case to be made for
Each one.
Each one of those, yeah.
So if you were going to try to go get traditional published, which is everybody's thought, I'm going to get so-and-so books to pick me up in New York or kind of thing. When you do that, a lot of people don't understand that process. So how would that work? Okay, I got this, I put my thoughts down on paper and I want to see if it's something that somebody will take. Do I write the whole book and send it to them? Do I do pieces? How would you, what do you send to a publisher?
Well, you probably shouldn't send anything to a publisher. You need to have an agent do that for you, because they can go right to the mezzanine and talk to the
man,
to the acquisition editors.
What would you send that guy, the agent?
If you just Google, nonfiction book proposal or fiction book proposal, there's templates out there, what it looks like. There's a whole bunch of variety of how to do it. But that's the communication vehicle for, hey, I've got a book idea. And no, you shouldn't write the whole thing. You're going to want to send in a sample chapter or two. But the book proposal elements are going to make the case. And it's really a business proposal. It's a business plan for the book. Traditional publishers are going to look at, number one, how many eyeballs can you put this in front of?
That's the number one.
That's absolutely
right. That's why if you're Barack Obama and you were the president, they know X amount of people are going to buy that book. Other than Ben and Steve, and we don't have that many people that know us, right?
And busy editors are going to flip right to the marketing section of your book proposal and try to count up how many
Facebooks and Twitters and Instagrams,
how much social media presence you have.
So social media presence is huge.
Oh, it's everything. It's everything. And you don't have to own those yourself, but you have to have some kind of plan to leverage other people's, and it better be convincing, because they're just, they're investors, essentially. Publishers are. They're looking at it and they're going,
I'm going to pay you X amount of money. I need a return on it.
I'm going to
pay like any other product.
Yeah, right? I'm going to pay you this to as an advance on royalties to finish the manuscript. Then I got to pay a designer to do the layout, and I got to pay a printer. Then I've got some distribution and marketing costs and things like that, inventory. But so I'm, anywhere from $50,000 to $300,000 in the hole starting this thing out. And so when I look at my margin on every book, and it's $8 a copy, it's simple math, right?
Yeah.
To figure out where the break-even point is, and then I look at your social media and I go, yes or no.
And then, I guess it's like music. Every now and then somebody just breaks out, and they just.
That's kind of the way they try to operate. Is they try to run break-evens on everything and hope for the home run, the fluke hit.
The number one hit.
Yeah.
So what does it take to be on the New York Times bestsellers list?
Not much. You just have to. You have to that week be.
Is it 10,000 sold or something in 2 weeks?
Well, it depends. It depends on the week.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Bestseller. If you're the only book that launches, you could sell one copy and you'd be the best seller.
So it's that simple.
Week. Yeah, but of course
it's not.
So there's a lot of paying attention to what else is being released that week. I think of poor Lionel Richie, who had this awesome #1 album, but Michael Jackson's Thriller was released the same year, and he didn't win the Grammy that year either.
Oh my God!
But it's the same kind of thing. It's like the Grammy Awards. You gotta You got to have
Timing.
you got to be the right book at the right time. But there's all different categories, and a lot of people have figured out how to game the system.
I hear that.
You know, one thing that's easy to pay attention to is that you can pre-sell copies. You know, get pre-orders from your constituents. You know, your followers, and they'll all register on launch day. So even though they bought the copy 6 months ago, you know, as a pre-order, it'll register on the day of launch. So you might
Makes your numbers high.
yes, you might have 8,000 people that have, you know, bought the book, but it'll all land on October 1st because that's the.
And I understand you can hire people to help you figure that out, right?
Yes,
if you got the
can.
money.
You can.
Yeah.
And some of those people have been shut down by the, you know, people that count that stuff.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But there's still ways to do it.
All right, so how about video? I mean, there's a lot of people doing video. I do a lot of video. What do people need to know about posting video on social media or doing video at work? What are some of the things that you see that people don't think about that they should?
So the main thing is just enormous amounts of content.
Enormous amount?
Yes, most people do not understand just how much content it takes to reach ubiquity and saturation, to have a real presence.
In other words, most people think because they posted a video this week that everybody saw it. They don't understand that.
Yeah, volume.
So you
matters.
really can't post too much almost.
You well, if you're posting stupid things, it's just going to accelerate
You're
a
stupid.
bad brand. But if your content is viable, posting, again, you know, this isn't a universal statement, but for the most part, people underpost.
Underpost.
Yeah, and if you just listen to Gary Vaynerchuk, you know, that's his mantra is to post a lot and to post everywhere.
Well, I remember reading him and him saying, you know, if ESPN called you and said you can run as many ads Saturday as you want to, how many ads would you sign up for? And you'd run every ad that you could, right? Because the guy that saw you in the morning is not the guy that saw you at lunch, and is not the guy that saw you at dinner or saw you at 11
right.
o'clock at night, right? It's all different.
Yeah.
And then I started watching that people look at their Facebook and social media more so at different times. Some people are in the morning with their coffee, some
That's
people
right.
while they're eating lunch. So you hit different people at different times. And so you can almost take the same video and post it 4 or 5 times a day and still not get to everybody, right?
Yeah. Probably the second principle, other than volume, is strategy. So you probably all heard the term funnel.
Yeah.
You know, but there needs to be a strategic function that every video plays.
It's moving you down the funnel.
It's got to be, you know, contributing to the idea of moving people down the funnel. Not every video has to have a call to action. That's not what I'm saying. But it needs to have a function that leads to some ultimate purpose for people. It could be that you're just trying to get an official subscription to your site. It could be that you're looking to sell widgets to people, but you know, posting content has to have some ultimate strategy and strategic function.
So help me work this out then. So the main reason why I started this podcast was to increase my speaking business. My thought was if I can show people that I'm having these thoughtful conversations with people, that I'm having conversations with people that can help them move their business down the line, give them some information, maybe that would look valuable, and they say, okay, Steve knows a little bit about what he's talking about.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll invite him in to speak. But it's not giving me as much of that as I want. I'm getting some of that.
Yeah.
How do I change my podcast to push it down the funnel? What would you tell me to do?
I'm not sure that I know how to answer that specific a question.
I was trying to get my free consulting thing going.
Yeah, there's actually no camera over there. There's no film in the camera. Well, so, you know, if you just think about marketing strategy, the idea is that people have to see something or hear something, X number of times before they even really notice it. So you want to have a value proposition that's clear. You want to describe a problem that they're having that they viscerally relate to, and what is the problem? Because that's how people move on something. Is it's one thing to be entertaining, or it's one thing to cast a beautiful vision or something, but in terms of marketing yourself, people respond to either the relief of pain or the pursuit of pleasure. So if you're not even addressing a problem that they have, that'd be something to look at and say, what does this do for you?
So people out there, you have a culture problem, so I'm bringing this culture expert to you to help you with your culture problem. Okay.
Well, we haven't really talked about that.
All right, so let's talk about that.
So, the problem, if I were to describe the problem to people, if I'm trying to relate to people about what's it like to run their business, they are running into issues with dysfunctional leadership. They're running into problems with a lack of intuition in the people that are supposed to be doing certain jobs, not taking initiative. They're running into shortfalls in bodies, right now. I mean, every restaurant you go to says now hiring. So they're trying to understand ultimately what is the motivational DNA of the workforce today, and why aren't they functioning the way they used to? Why aren't they behaving what they're, the way they should? Those are the pain points. Why is turnover so high? Why is employee retention so bad? Why is it so hard to find good employees, the ones that get it? And a lot of that has to do with creating a center of gravity for the culture. And the way to do that is to really take an analytical look at the social contract that exists between employers and employees. Is there a clear vision, mission, and values for the company? Is there a solid employee value proposition that would be create a win-win for the people that work here? In other words, alignment. And so there's ways that starts right from the recruiting and onboarding. And so those are the problems, whether it's engagement of employees, attracting and competing in the employee marketplace for good employees, productivity. Any of those things, the blue ocean for businesses today, it used to be, if you go back far enough, it used to be that we were learning how to do product development. How do we
Procter and Gamble?
And developing a product and ideating a product, that was sort of the frontier at one point. And we got really good at that. And now product development is sort of a commodity discipline that a lot of people know how to do well. There's very diminishing minimal returns that a company can get by investing more in product development. There's some, and for new categories, there's a lot more. But for most people, product development is not a horizon where you're going to say, oh, we just hit a home run. Process design was the next sort of epoch or frontier where there was tremendous growth in the economy. If you look back at all of the management and leadership and the creation of Six Sigma and ISO 9002, those are all process improvements. And so there was a season in which, process design and process development was a real frontier, and whoever excelled at that could scale businesses better and so forth. So product, process, we're now in, the frontier today is understanding, the human performance, and we've just begun to scratch the surface in that. So the blue ocean for most companies is taking the people that they already have, that they already hire, and figuring out better ways to motivate, incentivize, leverage the human capital component. And like I said, we've barely scratched the surface on how
And
to
that's
do that.
culture, creating a better culture.
Yeah.
So give me a situation, a cultural icon like Chick-fil-A. What are they doing that the rest of their peers aren't doing?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what they did in terms of those 3 states.
Okay.
You know, we had the product phase when Truett invented the chicken sandwich, and everybody said, "Hey, that's pretty good."
Instead of a hamburger.
Yeah, and so if you think about it, their growth originally was based on product design. You know, hey, that's a good sandwich, everybody got to get one. And after a while, Truett would have seen a tapering off and a diminishing return on product design and product, production. But the second phase, the process, he entered into, and Chick-fil-A entered into, how do we scale this? So they created systems and operations, and, next thing you know, they have these independent operators, and they're buying the real estate, and the operators are moving into the properties, and they figured out frankly, a pretty genius system for operations. And they ran that, and they've been tweaking it, and they still do a lot of tweaking. But if you look at it, there would be diminishing returns at some point on process improvements. And so what they did, which was so brilliant, is about halfway through the process phase, they looked ahead and they said, our people are going to be the next frontier for us. And so they began investing heavily in people when they were still in the middle of the process phase, figuring out, they were still fine-tuning a lot of process. But guys like Mark Miller and Dan Cathy, they looked, and I remember Mark Miller would say that, we need to work on bench depth, talking about their leaders. And so I heard one statistic that for every dollar that they spent training employees how to make a chicken sandwich, they'd spend $10 on why they should do it a certain way, the culture and values of the company. So they were investing in people. Now, what a lot of companies do is, they'll figure out a great product and they'll scale it. Your Uncle Bill says, hey, that's a great idea, you should franchise it. And they'll create the operations, and then they'll stop after that. The end of their world is, we're working on operations, and they'll operationalize, but it gets to where they're getting a dollar for every dollar they spend on process improvements. And what happens is, when the bigger the organization gets, if you don't recognize the people factor. See, the thing about people, the people phase that comes to every growing organization if they survive long enough, is that the number one accomplishment that you make is surviving as a people group that doesn't kill each other. So product design is the most important in this phase, process and design is the most important, and then people is figuring out how to exist as a functional people group. What a lot of companies do is they get big and then they just collapse under their own weight because they don't understand, they've attracted all of these employees, but they've never figured out how to thrive and soar as a people group. Whereas companies like Chick-fil-A, they actually have what's called a sigmoid curve, where you actually have another big climb, because now you've got all of this mass of people and you've done the work to have them all pulling on the rope in the same direction. And there's like a whole nother
level.
Yeah, whole nother level. And that's exactly, I remember when I started working with Chick-fil-A, I think their average store volume was around 3 million. And they were already doubling down on people development. And they were changing the store design and everything else, all of that stuff that goes with process development. But, and today the average store is almost, I think, $9 or $10 million. Wow. And, they've changed the footprint a little bit. Another company that we worked with, also a franchised company, they doubled in size in 3 years by investing in people. They doubled in top line revenue in 3 years, And if you look at the makeup of the company, it was from 82% of it was from existing people. It's not like they added people. It was just they figured out how to get greater efficiency, more engagement, take on more business.
Take what they had and make it better.
Yeah. But that's what a Chick-fil-A does different, that they understand all three modes of the company, of the business strategy.
Who else is another example of a company that we know that you think's a real got the culture piece down?
Boy, I'm hesitant to say who has it. There's some good ones. I wouldn't say that
Anybody in Chick-fil-A's area, realm? Is there any other great companies out there that you just think are the beacons of doing it right?
I'd have to think about how I want to say that, because here's the thing, is most of them, I mean, I could name a bunch that are doing some things well and tell you why I think that's great, but honestly, I'm concerned that even Chick-fil-A has had its struggles, and I'll tell you what I'm talking about. They had their heyday, and I'm pointing to maybe 10 years ago, and they're not doing bad today, but the thing is, there was a point of time in which half of Chick-fil-A's employees had less than 2 years tenure. Half of their employees had, and
A large turnover.
well, it wasn't turnover, it was growth. So I think that even they could have done better with cultural density, because they're, and I was inside enough to know that there were people in there who had not been onboarded to the culture as well as they should have been. And so, I mean, there was conflict internally. That's all I should probably say about that. But there were people who just were oblivious to what it's like to do it the Chick-fil-A way. Half of the employees were new. They weren't all half, that whole half wasn't oblivious, but there were a lot of people.
They didn't have enough elders there to tell them how it should be.
Having elders do it was the old school way, that they had grown slowly enough that, people were seasoned into cultural alignment.
Cultural alignment.
But there came a point when they just grew so fast that it's like putting wet firewood on the fireplace. It's not going to burn the same way. And
I know a guy that's got a local restaurant franchise, and one of the things he's told me is they started franchising, and he had to step back because there was no shortage of guys that could write a check to open a franchise. The problem was he didn't have the internal piece together. He said, I'm going to wait and build these managers so that when you write me a check, I'm going to say, you need to pick Johnny or Allie or Sally to go with you and make them part owner.
Right.
And he thinks that's a better way to go. I think he's on to something with that.
Yeah, well, we see that a lot. I think I'm hesitant to name names just because of confidentiality, but I can name a handful of companies that we've talked to. One had, sold and bought back the franchise from the next owners. And in every single case, it has to do with the culture not being codified well into the business plan. Mm-hmm. It's easy to take a check from PE or VC
and go out and grow.
But those people have a completely different objective.
Right. They won't return on their money, right?
Right. They have a 3 to 5 year flip, and I'm not down on those guys. They're trying to do one thing, but usually the founder of a company or the leader of a company, is looking to do more than just increase the sale check, the size of the check for selling it. They're trying to also leave a legacy. They've got employees and coworkers that they've been
hired.
With. And I've got another client who had an enormous offer from a high-profile entity, and she actually said, "There's no way I'm selling the company to that guy." He had more money, but
She didn't like.
she was like, she was thinking about, what it would do to the company. She
Right.
said he'll destroy this place.
That's good. There are not a lot of those people out there.
Yeah,
Most people take the money and run.
yeah, yeah. That's probably something to think about. Is that you know there's two reasons to build a great culture. One is it really does affect the investment value of a company. The valuation of a company. But there's also just doing what's right. We're a culture at large, and creating jobs for people and jobs that are pleasant for people. I mean, that's our country, and so there's something to be said for, if you look at what the banking industry has done with some of the bailout money that the government has given it, instead of rebuilding infrastructure, which is the government's intent, was working on the infrastructure, they turned it back into buybacks of their own stock because they could turn a quick buck doing that. And it's left us kind of back where we were versus improving the economy as a whole. So I don't know, I have kind of a holistic approach to business. But
what other things are people not thinking about in culture? What else would you tell somebody that they need to be thinking about?
So I think the main thing, though, is just understanding that culture is a discipline now. It's an organizational discipline. Culture is not just casual Fridays or just kind of a general feel good, balloons and cake and ping pong balls and pool tables and in the lobby and stuff like that. It's not just what we call an aesthetic. That it's actually a discipline. That it really is about understanding the same way that you would bring efficacy to the stewardship of supply chain resources. How are we going to protect the efficiency of our systems and operations? Human capital has the same kind of spectrum, that it can either be functioning well or not. And it used to be, in the age of authority, it was like an add-on. It didn't really change performance because there was so much motivation coming from just the authority relationship with work. So I can understand why people thought of it and still, tend to think of it as a fluffy thing that you do as an extra. But in today's psychological state of the workforce, it's actually one of the most important cause and effect factors that determines employee retention, becoming an employer culture where you are first to work for a lot of young people. They've heard about you, they want to go there, they tell their friends, this is great, come on, let's work here. And that really has a dramatic effect on your competition for work, in the workforce. So, that's the main thing, is just to understand that this is not just kind of something extra that you do, that this is implicit to your strategic plan. If you're in a business where human performance is an important part of the strategy,
Which is most
of them are. There are admittedly some where they just, as long as you turn on the switch and put the oats in the hopper,
it works.
It's like nobody has to be happy. It's just they got to make the donuts.
Right.
But for a lot of companies, increasingly, human performance and brand competitiveness. Your internal brand used to be something that nobody ever saw. It was only the external facing brand, and that's why people would fly up to Madison Avenue in New York and slap a logo and do a commercial, and they'd invent invent places like the land of the Jolly Green Giant or Marlboro Country, and it had nothing to do with what the product was. The internal brand, nobody ever
It
saw
was branding.
Right, it was external branding.
Yeah.
But today with social media, the brand inside the company, gets shown on Glassdoor. And, you can get canceled for something that happens on the inside, and it doesn't have anything to do with the
So
product.
what about Twitter? All these people got laid off, all this turmoil's been
Yeah.
going on. What do you think about that?
I mean, you mean the company Twitter?
Yeah, well, since Elon bought the company, and what would you
Well,
have coached him on to do?
I don't know what he's trying to do there, so I can't say that he's doing anything wrong. I think that investment is insignificant enough to him potentially. He might be just trying to make a point. I don't know what he's doing. But if I were trying to run the company, obviously there's a way to handle a merger or a takeover in a way that creates better stickiness with employees. If you're trying to clean house, then
He
I'd
did a
say-
good job of
then
that,
I'd
didn't
say, well, he pulled that one off. But the point I'm trying to make is that what's going on inside a company is a significant part of the customer-facing brand now, and that used to not be the case. And so you
Makes
have
sense.
to if you're protecting your brand. It used to be that, the label had to look good, the marketing had to look good, customer experience had to be good. Today, it's that plus the employee experience has to be a certain way because it's visible to everybody, the customers, the partners,
How they
vendors.
interact with your customers and
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff.
It affects the valuation of the company.
So what about HR hiring? Are the companies, are they doing that all wrong? Are they doing what they need to do to hire the right people?
Some of them are. Just to give you an example of how sophisticated it is. I mean, the ones who know, there's the tactical skills of hiring, right? But there's also the strategic skills of hiring. For example, there are ways to really think through and evaluate the cultural potential of different employees. There's ways in your recruiting to naturally attract people. We call it self-selection. They self-select in, and for that matter, there's ways for existing long-term employees to sense a need to self-select out of a culture. And so, speaking of Elon Musk, there were other ways for him to introduce the principles that were respectable and important, and then have people just say, I'd like to, pursue something different because this isn't really what I signed up for.
That's not the culture that I came under, right?
Yeah, but even not just it may be that those are admirable values that you're pursuing, but I'm not against those, but I'm kind of for something else even more.
Mm-hmm. Does the military have a good culture?
Boy, I don't know if I know
Are
the
they,
answer
are
to
they
that.
building culture, or are they building leaders, or what are they building? In your
Well,
opinion?
typically the military, they first of all they have an authoritative environment, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the rules are different in military because you can literally tell somebody to do a push-up and they have to do it. But historically, that's where leadership existed before it existed in business. They had a real clear understanding of what leadership looks like.
So that's interesting. Okay, so in the military, you're right. It's authoritative, and so you're going to do what you're told to do, or you're going to get kicked out, or you're
Right.
going to leave, or they're going to run you off. They're not trying to make you excited about what you're doing. Right?
Well, they are, but they're doing it through different means. It's not an elective
decision.
day-to-day experience. But think about it. The reason that you're in the military is because of a cause that you're contributing to, unless you were drafted.
Right.
But even then, they would do things to try to help you understand the cause that you're supporting. The military runs the gamut. There's in the optional elective military, there's people who are there, obviously by choice. a lot of kids join the military because they're still trying to figure out authority. You know, there may be kids who never finished wrestling with authority as kids growing up, teenagers, and so they have to, oddly enough, they end up, signing up to be under some kind of authority as if they have unfinished business there. I think that I've heard it described as subconsciously they're looking to know that there is an authority out there that can control them because it creates a feeling of safety to know that that exists. I mean,
So, but I think about they allow you to get better at your craft. You
Yep.
definitely know what the cause is,
Mhm.
and there is a community there.
Yeah, that's good.
So, I mean, it seems like the people that go in and stay there are excited about being there, or and there is an advancement
Yeah.
factor, right? You can see where you can go if you
Absolutely.
do what you need to do. Whereas a lot of corporations, you don't know. You got to hope that this manager will bring
Right.
you on, right?
Yeah, I mean, so let's look at the 15 categories there as what
Okay.
you're saying. That's a great point because they do potentially. I tend to think of what you see in the news, which is people that are complaining about some breakdown in the system. But they definitely offer you a way to get a paycheck. They offer you a sense of safety physically, maybe not emotionally.
Right.
You have to be willing to take some abuse, but it's kind of in the context of shaping you. Operationally, they're quite well designed usually. They train people effectively. They control they'll raise your expectations for workload and stress, but they're managing those, at least you could say. They kill very few people by accident. And then they tend to put people in jobs where they fit. So those are the management disciplines that we
So
measure.
they're good there.
Yeah. Then on the leadership disciplines, they cast vision for what they're all about. And they do a great job of that. They have a career path for you to advance along, and you can pursue that, and they're going to tend to promote you anyway. They're innovative, and at least the American Army is, or military is. They have some of the best technology in the world. Now, where they don't necessarily do a great job, or if they do, it's kind of in a weird way, is this empathy that they tend to look at what you can do for the military more than they look at, I care about you, except in offline functions, you can develop close relationships. Any two people that have been in a foxhole together tend to be kind of friends for life. So that's how they meet that need. Authenticity is the other function of leadership, and it probably runs the gamut. There's probably a lot of posers who are in leadership, and there's a lot of respectable ones too, but I would imagine that if there were someone inauthentic, like that doesn't work in the corporate world, you can probably get away with that a little easier in the military. And then, I really wonder how many people are self-actualizing as military people. I kind of think that it would be a lot lower than in the free world, so to speak.
Yeah.
But if they are, they get to work a craft, they get to contribute to a cause, and they get to belong to a community. So
that's why people stay there for 20 years a lot of times. Plus, they get a paycheck.
that's exactly right. Well, they've climbed the career ladder.
Well, I'm not a military guy, but I just was talking to a guy's 3-star general. He said, once you become a general, you don't get to decide when you retire. The guys above you decide when you're going to retire.
Yeah.
You can't just okay, guys, I want to leave, even though you got your time in.
Wow.
I didn't know that. So
I didn't know
you
that
kind
either.
of have to wait on them to say, all right, we're done with you, I
Yeah.
guess.
Right.
I don't know. It's pretty cool. So Ben, if somebody wanted to explore that with their company and they wanted to see what their culture was like and they wanted to bring you in to do the survey and stuff, how would that work?
Yeah. Well, it's pretty simple. So the
911 Ben?
yeah, well, I would say go to our website, theculturemri.com, and there's an info,
Thing there.
button. Yeah, you can just, and we'll do a demo, talk to you all about it and everything. The process is pretty straightforward. We gather some basic data. We as a third party issue the whole survey from the outside. It's real important for confidentiality. You know, people give better answers when it's not potentially being tapped by the mothership.
And you let them know that when they're filling it out, hey, your
we-
boss isn't going to see this.
We make a big deal out of getting them in the comfort zone on that. Like I said, we do some interviews to make sure we understand the narrative behind the data. It all shows up on a dashboard. We do a long readout with the leadership team to make sure everybody understands what's going on. And it comes with a full report that has the state of the social contract in every one of those categories, as well as sets of recommendations for what to do to move the needle. And then if you know, depending on their interest, most of them are interested in obviously changing the culture, not just understanding, you know, improving it or fixing it if it's toxic. Is you know, it's typically a 12-month kind of arrangement where you know, we'll coach them on how to implement
How often
culture
would you meet with them?
transformation. It depends. Some of them you know, if we move aggressively, for some companies this becomes the strategic plan for the company. And for those people, we're there a couple times a month at least, you
Gotcha.
know, and we're meeting with the C-suite and we're going deep. And, you know, some of the companies have called us, you know, the leadership team below wonders who these strange people are walking around, and, you know, they call us the fifth executive or something because they don't know who we are. But so we're pretty embedded in that. Some situations, a lot of companies just need the lens. They need to, you know, understand.
See.
They just need to know what's going on. They have strong leadership that can, but they just don't have the feedback, at least accurately, and so they can just run with finding that. We do a lot of work with just supporting existing consultants. So there's entire consulting firms out there, and we're just sort of like the radiology team for the doctor that you know, we do the MRI in the company. We give that information to the primary care physician, you know, the consultant, and it just helps them and supports the work that they're already doing.
That's good.
So, but it starts with, you know, info@theculturemri.com, and then just opening discussion on what the company needs and what they think they need and how we can support it.
So they can just call you and talk about it.
Yeah,
All right, guys. Hey, appreciate you being here, Ben. Thank you so much.
thank you.
And I hope you learned something about culture today. I mean, like I said, Ben's the guy on that. And if you got any questions, don't hesitate to give Ben a call. And if you like what you see, please share it on all the social media and stuff when you see this. It helps me get it out. And if you know anybody out there that needs a good speaker at their next meeting, give me a call. Thank you till next time.